Good morning, everyone. This is the penultimate podcast in our series Lent 40 Days of Change. So it's kind of quite interesting just finishing it off. And I wanted to finish this series with talking about something that's very real, and that is suffering. It's very real in the world, it's very real whether we're a Christian or not. But for a Christian, it has considerable meaning. Suffering, as I said, is real. And the Apostle Paul was in no doubt of that. He talked about some of the things that he went through being stoned, being thrown out of places, being shipwrecked, all sorts of things he goes through, being beaten, being thrown in prison, things that he went through and suffered. So he knew about suffering, and it's a very real thing in life. But it doesn't mean that the Christian race is over. Instead, suffering kind of spurs on our performance. It produces perseverance in us, and what the kind of get up and go instinct that carries someone through trials, through difficulties towards their goal. Like the marathon runners who every year, normally, I don't know if it's happening this year, I think it might be happening later in the year, but tens of thousands of marathon runners line the streets of London. If they complete it, they get a kind of little medal, and I've seen them and had one around my neck, although I've never run. But they get that for what? For just competing, for just finishing, for just getting there to the line. Whether they do it in world record time of under 2 hours, what is it, about an hour and 50 minutes, or whether they take a week to do it, they get to finish it and complete it. Marathon runners run around the streets, they suffer, and everybody talks about hitting the wall. Well, I think there's kind of like a whole lot of things you hit when you're doing it, but they go through it. Why? To reach their objective, to reach their quest. They recognise that suffering was something inevitable on their journey of running the marathon. This is what Paul writes in Romans 5, 3-4. We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. So endurance is this not giving up attitude. We started, so we'll finish. People always give up too soon. It's a truism. It was Winston Churchill who said, never give up on something you can't go a day without thinking about. Character is what God is developing in us. It's not just honing what we thought was our character, but it's character that God's developing in us. And what is God trying to do? To make us to be more like Christ. That's the goal, that we might be mature, we might reach maturity, and be like Christ. He is the potter. That's one illustration the Bible uses, that God is the potter and we are the clay. He's moulding us and shaping us. And you can imagine if clay had feeling, or if stone had feeling, as the sculptor was chiseling away at it, to shape it and to form something that was there with potential into something beautiful. That is what God is doing in us. And this verse, Paul points to the benefit of salvation we experience immediately. That salvation that we the benefit of salvation we get immediately, but those in Christ will suffer. But the suffering matters for the Christian. For the non-Christian, suffering's merely suffering. It's pain, it's loss, it's frustration, it's meaningless. But for those in Christ, however, suffering has a point. Since we're destined for something higher, it accomplishes great good in us. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis, who has a lot to say on the whole thing about suffering and pain. And this is one of his quotes: "We shall draw nearer to God not by trying to avoid the sufferings inherent in all loves." And he ties suffering and love together. If you don't kind of want to suffer, then hey, avoid loving. Is kind of one of the things you can get from his writings. But we should draw nearer to God, not by trying to avoid the sufferings inherent in all loves, but by accepting them and offering them to him, throwing away all defensive armour. In our hearts, if our hearts need to be broken, and if he chooses this as the way in which they should break, so be it. In other words, it says, I'm the clay, God is the potter. He knows what he's doing. I might choose another way. I don't understand it, but he knows who he is. God is God, and I trust God is what he's saying. Being Christ does not end our personal temporary sufferings on earth. That suffering, however, said, does produce something in us. And Paul calls it here endurance. But that in itself leads on to produce other things, the character of Christ. It's fashioning something in us. We read about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long suffering. Those things are being produced in us, and maybe sometimes it's through suffering that we learn these things. Endurance, I said, is the ability to keep going when we feel like stopping. Now, I don't know if you've done Couch to 5K or if you've done a marathon or a half marathon. Congratulations if you've done any of those things. But you didn't just start doing that, did you? You didn't get up off of your sofa and said, I'm just going to run a marathon now. But you built to it, you built to it, you built to it. You trained yourself for it. And so in this context that we're talking about, endurance is our ability to trust God for longer stretches of time and through greater degrees of difficulty. Suffering is an opportunity to trust God at a deeper level through harder stuff, and we go further and we go better, and it develops us as people. Finally, I finish with a quote by Albert Einstein. It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. That's not a bad thing for us to think about. God bless you, and please join me tomorrow for the last of these Lent 40 days of change. However, you can join me on Zoom on Sunday morning if you want at 6:15, and I'll tell you how to do that tomorrow. God bless, have a great day.